So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us. The floor is yours. Sarah, you're muted.
Here, sorry. I was saying thank you very much, John, for the invitation, and to the association also to giving me the opportunity to discuss with many writers that I see are connecting right now to the chat. As John said, I'm a literary agent based in Montreal. I'll tell you a few words about who I am and what I do exactly as a literary agent and what our literary agency does, because all literary agency does not work exactly the same, might not be looking exactly for the same thing. And then I'll go portions after portions of different aspects of the work that a literary agent do, how to query a literary agent, when to query a literary agent, how you work with him. So I'll try to make it as complete as possible, and there will be time for question through the talk. So I'll just make some pause, and we can further discuss some aspect that I might have mentioned. Maybe just as a starting question, if you can raise hand, if any of you have already submitted a text to a literary agent, or just to get a sense of I think that, yes, if in the reaction you can raise hands. Okay, I see 1, 2. Okay. Okay, so we have some of you. Okay, I'll just move through. Okay, perfect. So to tell you a little more about myself, I'm French and Italian, was born and raised in Paris. Always a great lover of literature. I always had books surrounding me in my life. I kind of worked with books. I started with studies in international relations, and then moved on to art history. And then for 10 years in Paris, I worked in several venues dedicated to cultural creation, like setting up exhibitions, talks, screenings, concerts. And I did this for 10 years, but COVID hit, and I had it the back of my mind. It was time maybe for a change. And I thought about what has always been present in my life, and it was book and literature. I organized a lot of conferences with writers. I love to give floor to people who write. So I moved to Canada, and I said, okay, let's try to make this project happen. And I met an editor called Brigitte Bouchard. She's French Quebecer, and she has been a publisher for almost 30 years. She started here in Quebec, a publishing house called Les Allusifs, who published a lot of translated literature. Then she worked in France for 10 years. She published writers such as Maya Angelou, Roberto Bolaño, a lot of like foreign literature. And then she started her agency. I sent her a message. We met, and kind of 10 minutes after we met, we started working together. And this is the first thing I mentioned, not only for you to know about myself, but also to say that it's important to talk about your projects, and it's important to meet people. And if you have a book, I think it's important you talk about it to people, about what you're writing or what's your project. You never know how things work. First of all, it might be kind of a practice for you to be able to pitch your book, but it's also might open some avenues and some path you did not expect. So I've been working with her for almost 3 years now. I'm an associate. So we're a small literary agency. We are 3 years old. We represent 18 writers. And what we represent is mostly literary fiction and not non-fiction. We are looking for what we often say voices. It means like when we start reading a submission, we are hit by the way it's written, and we say, okay, this sounds different to my ear, or this is a different way to tell a story that I never heard before. Or so I think as any literary agent, you're always looking for something that seems new, that seems a bit different, that's something like you've never heard before or read before, or not with this approach, or not in this aspect. As mentioned, today we represent 18 writers, and that's what we love to do. We love to start working with a writer and try and help build this career. So I will give an example. If you have a debut writer, a debut novelist that will submit is let's say a novel, we read it. If we like it, we're always both discussing about whether we like it. It's a choice we make, the two of us. And once we agree that we love the book, we often ask to meet or to have a Zoom with the writer. It's very important because when you get a literary agent, or when you have the opportunity to choose, if you have several people interested in your work, you have to make sure it's someone you can have a trustworthy relationship with, someone it's going to be maybe one of the most important relationships you're going to have in the industry. Because if it's an agent that you're going along very well, they will be your agent maybe for 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years. And while you might change publisher, you might change publishing house, the agent is supposed to be kind of the stable pillar of your career, and the one you can go to if you have a question, if you're looking for advice, someone who will be honest with you about your writing and what can be improved, what will be the best decision for your work to be read by as many readers as possible. So we always meet the person because we want to make sure we're on the same page, we're able to work together. The person, also the writer, is ready to work, because, and that might be very important point that I'll maybe get into a bit further later, but you need to know when it's the right moment for you to get a literary agent. Just to finish with the agency, and then I'll go back to this point, which is very important. So we present 18 writers. Half of them are French speaking. The other half comes from pretty much all around the world. We have from Italy, Poland, Jordan, Argentina, Chile. It's pretty much as long as we can read the book in a language that we can read or is translated and we love it, we go for it. What we do is try to secure deals for the writers. First is in native language. If, let's say, we have a French writer, we'll look first and foremost we will work on the text with him, editing work. And that's why my associate Brigitte will mostly do, because she has been an editor for such a long time. And once we believe the text is ready, we send it to publishers. We are constantly in contact with publishers and editors to know what they are looking for, what are the kind of books they would like to read, if there could be a good fit also in their personality with the writer that we represent. So we'll start sending them with a pitch. We will try to share our enthusiasm. I think it's a work of sharing what you believe in. It's a work almost of faith, because sometimes it's like a lot of time. So we will submit to maybe 3, 4, 5 editors, wait for feedback until hopefully someone will make an offer. Maybe we'll receive 2 offers. Then we will negotiate the deal, make sure your contract is okay, there's nothing fishy in what's in the contract, sign it, and then we'll pursue with trying and finding editors for your book to be translated. It's another aspect. The third aspect is if you try and work for your book to be maybe adapted as a movie, as a TV series, whatever. So these are the different aspects that we work on. I don't know if that far you have already questions, or if we can move on to... Please feel free to open your mic if you... No, so...
I do have a small question, but it might be like more appropriate for a Q&A
Yes.
At the end. But I was just wondering what kind of things you look for when you say that in a contract there might be something fishy. Just kind of if you have any examples you know of some of like what could come up in a contract to just be wary of.
There are many aspects that we look at in the contract, also depending on the country we're working with. For instance, I work a lot with France, and in France there is a tradition of selling the book for to the writer, not for 5 years, not for 10 years, not for 15 years, but for 70 years after your death. So it's a French tradition. It's something we always look at because it's very difficult if one day you're not satisfied with your publisher, if your publisher is not doing anything to make your book exist on bookshelves, it's very hard to be out of this contract. So we are always careful at the duration of the contract and how you can get out of it if there's any problem. So duration of the contract. We're also, of course, looking at how much they're gonna buy your book. What can be fishy? It really depends. You never want to have an editor who asks you to pay anything for publishing your book. That's very important, and that's the same as an agent. An agent or a publisher should never ask you for money before a book being published. What else can it be? On the top of my head, these are the first things I'm thinking of. It's really, then I can, if I think of any other aspect, I'll let you know through the conversation. Yes,
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Is there anything else, or I may?
I have a question about the translation aspect.
Yes.
How soon after, you know, you deal with the language that you have there, would you already be thinking of translation?
Yes. It's a very good question. I think I made it sound like it all happened very quick. It's a very long time process. Publishing, we're always talking about 2 years between the time that you sign your contract and your book will be released, at least in the US. In France, it might be 18 months, but it's a very, very long-term process. So I kind of make it short, but the first thing you will do is, of course, secure the deal in the native language. And then you can start working with translation, but before the book was released, but this is not most of the time. Or you can start kind of teasing. I'll tell you a bit more about how we sell foreign rights, because there's a whole industry happening behind every book, and I'll tell you more about it. But before the book is released, let's say if the book was bought in a 10-way auctions, if you had 10 publishing houses interested in the book, I will for sure be able to sell it, to sell translations, to sell it to other countries way before it is released. In other cases, maybe if it's a debut novelist, it's something more confidential. I will need the book maybe to come out, see how it goes, and then be able to convince publishers with the number of sales, with the press that the book had, with a very nice blurb from a very famous writer who really loved it. So yes, while I'm saying that, what I realize, and it's important to understand, is that it's a very competitive business. Editors receive a lot of submissions, a lot. They have very little time. So you kind of, as an agent, have to, I always say, reassure them about how good the book is and kind of give them the signal of a potential success, even if you never know before a book is released, but you have to let them know, oh, okay, we sell that many copies and we have this amazing article in a very good newspaper. Oh, and we had a blurb from Salman Rushdie or whatever about the book. And this will help build kind of the confidence of the editor to go and buy the book. So yes, that's pretty much how.
But,
and then.
But how could you have a quote from, for example, Salman Rushdie if the book isn't even published yet?
Sometimes you ask it before.
Before, huh?
Yes. We have a book that we love, and we have some hard time finding a publisher because it's a bit special, and we ask for a French. We were kind of convinced a French writer that's pretty famous will love the book, and we asked him, look, here is the book. Would you be willing to read it and maybe give us a blurb? And he accepted.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Could I ask how you measure the success rate of a book. I get different figures. For example, I was talking to a publisher in Australia, and she said that if they sell 500 copies of the book, they consider that to be successful. But if you translate that into royalties, it's enough for perhaps, pizza for the family. I'm just wondering what is your standard of measurement for a successful book, and how successful have you say you have 18 writers in your stable. Can you give us an idea of how successful their sales have been?
Okay, yes. I think how you measure success really depend on the book you're selling. I will not expect a debut novelist writing a book, maybe very literary, very experimental, to sell as many copies. I would expect from young adult fantasy, or maybe non-prescriptive nonfiction, like how to make a lot of money in a year. So it really depends on the kind of book. It would be like a movie. You have this big blockbuster and you have this more art house movie. So this is different. If you want to have some figure, we represent a debut novelist. She released her first novel 3 years ago in French. It's called Fatima Das, and her book was a huge success. She sold, I'm very bad with figures in English, 70,000 copies, 100,000. Does it make sense?
70,000.
Yes. Let me make sure that, yes.
Yeah.
So especially for a first novel, this is huge. In France, I'll talk a little about France because this is where but I think it also works with Quebec. In French, you would consider a first novel to be successful if it sells over 3,000 copies. 2,000, 3,000 copies, it's a good start. I think it's in Quebec, it will be more around maybe 1,000 copies. And then again, it really depends on the kind of book you're selling. But in the case of Fatima Das, it was only in France 7,000. And then it was translated in 12 languages, which is like for us a good success, knowing that we're a small agency. So for us, this is
Est-ce que c'est 70,000?
Yes, 70,000.
So, okay, 70,000.
70,000. But yeah, I would say in Quebec, if you have over 1,000, it's a good start. Then we have a writer called Caroline Dawson who sold 63. I'm so bad at this. 63000. 63.
63,000, yeah. Actually, I translated her book into English and it's doing well in English too.
Oh, did you translate it?
Yeah.
Oh, we just sold it in France. Yes. So yes, I don't know if that kind of answer your question. Depending on the book, and then, but of course we know that it takes time. I do not expect a first novel to sell 10,000 copies, or we're kind of working on the long term and start with the first book and then see what happens. We try to be very loyal to the writers we represent. We stay with them. However, is it working for us? We know it takes a lot of time. So,
how involved is the agent with the marketing of the book, or is that predominantly left to the publisher and the author?
What we do is we always ask. Well, very often we ask for a marketing plan when we sign the contract. It is part of what we will make our decision, like based on the offer, on the number of copy they want to print, but also on how they're gonna have what is the business and marketing and communication plan they're going to implement. And what we always try to do is kind of nudge the publisher to do as much as they can to support the book, whether it is for the press, whether it is for the marketing. So we don't design it ourselves, but we might ask to have like a well-designed marketing plan and kind of push them. And if we feel like an editor or publisher is kind of setting the book aside or not putting as many effort as it could, we will nudge them and tell them, hey, look, what can we do to have maybe the author make a tour, and try to always push them to promote the book as much as they can.
Sarah, can I confirm that based on how you're describing things, that it is the preference of literary agents to receive, when it becomes an perhaps unsolicited or a solicited manuscript, that you're looking for a full finished manuscript as opposed to a segment or a pitch or an outline?
Thank you very much, Chelsea, for the question, because it's the perfect transition to the next part. And that is for me extremely, extremely important. How to get an agent. The first thing, I know that might sound ridiculous. I know you're all very professional, but it's really to write the best book that you can write. And what I mean by that is that you query an agent when you feel like you've done everything you could on your own to write the book, and that you reached a moment where you cannot go further in your writing and you really did everything you could. It's a long process writing a book. It takes time. You need to let it sit for a moment, go back at it, then leave it again. Then maybe you can have beta readers reading it, hear from feedback. And really, you need to work on your craft. Just like editors, literary agent receives a lot of submission. Of course, we try to detect a potential, but we also need to know that someone already advanced in their craft as much as they could. So to answer more precisely your question, we receive all kinds of queries, and we're not the most square agent, so we're kind of open to some form of originality. But I always say, send a consistent piece of work. Do not send a chapter, do not send 2 short novels, do not send 2 poetries. Send something that is done, or query from something that is finished, a book that is finished, whether it's a novel, whether or don't send here are 3 books that I wrote that you can choose from. You need to think before and say, okay, what's the best book? What's the book that I was really drawn to write, that really came out of a personal kind of urge to write? What is my book about? Like, really go to the bottom of what you're writing about. You need to own your book in a way. You need to be able to pitch it to anyone, and really to reach the point that you say, okay, this is the best I could do. I had feedback. I was able to receive them. I was able to rewrite based on what I heard. I was also able to sort advices that I thought were relevant and maybe some others not. But I did all the documentation it required. I feel my plot is very well built. I feel that my writing style is consistent throughout the book. I feel like my character building is now very strong. I can just think about my character and know what he will do in whatever situation it will be in. So really, don't rush it. Don't send a query if you don't have your book already at a point where you feel this is the best book I can write. And I say don't rush it because you don't have that many opportunities with an agent. It's very hard that if he didn't accept your query the first time, he will look at it for a second time. We're a very small agency, so we receive maybe 20 queries a month, maybe even less. But if we're talking about big American literary agency, maybe it will be 3,000 a week. Like, there's so many of them. So make sure, and really, it's the best book that you were able to write, and make sure it's consistent, and as if you were about to send it to a publisher, Yes.
Could you break down the query part of it? So I've worked as a freelance nonfiction writer for a long time, and so there's a sort of a pattern. You know, if I'm pitching to the Gazette or a magazine or something, usually a brief introduction and 100-word summary of the intended article. Could you give us an idea of, if you're pitching to an agent, what you put in the pitch? So is it a summary of the book? Do you include a biography, description of your previous publications? I'm just wondering how much should you put in a pitch to a publisher? Sorry, to an agent.
So there's a lot of resources about query. I shared with John some podcast I've been also listening to, because as I was mentioning, we're not the most query obsessed, but what you need, what's very important, I think one thing you should have in mind is short and sweet. Don't make it too long. I've heard an agent, and I completely agree, make it the size of your computer screen. Like, make it a one-page letter top, where what you need to mention is what is your book about? I mean, in terms of topics that you will address. A bit of the plot, but we really don't need the whole synopsis. She woke up in the morning, she ran into someone and running into that person. She's in travel there. This is not what we're looking for. You need to have a good hook. You need to have a bit of the topic, a bit of the story, just like what you will read from the back cover of a book. Imagine that you go to a bookstore and you want to read a book. So I'll just like this, I'll just look. So it's short, and it mentions some elements of your biography. I always say the biography doesn't need to be long. You need, I think, to mention what parts of your biography that are related to writing. If you make any creative writing master, if you wrote any pieces in prestigious newspapers, if you already had book published, although this even is interesting, but make it really short. Yes, and I always say think it as the like the summary you have on the back of a book. You don't have the whole synopsis, you just get a sense of what it is, and you don't need to give the agent any argument. This book will sell so well because the agent will know this is part of their work. Also, what can be interesting, it's to put what we call comparative titles. This is a story at the crossroad of, and you put some books, some title of books, but it can also be series. It can also be movies. If you give comp title, make sure it's contemporary. Like it's also give the sense that you know a bit of the industry and of what is currently happening and how your book will fit in certain category. So if you say it's a love story at the crossroad of Madame Bovary and Romeo and Juliet, it's like saying nothing. You'd rather say it's mention a movie, I don't know, like it's a love story at the crossroad of Anatomy of a Fall, which is a movie, and something very contemporary. And really, I think when you write this query, what you must have in mind is that what makes my book different. You will not phrase it that way, but what makes it different? I think what makes it stand out.
What you've been talking about, novels or nonfiction, what do you have anything advice about how to feel ready with, if it's a short story collection, apart from consistency? I mean, or could you talk a bit to that, please?
Sorry, can you repeat your question? I'm not sure
Right. Well, you're speaking about novels or nonfiction, but what if the writer writes short fiction, short stories, and I know I think what you would say is there should be a consistency between the stories, but how does one know?
If you write short stories, it needs to be a collection. It needs so you need to have a certain number of them. Of course, depending on how long they are. And if you put them together, there might be some sort of thread running through the stories.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Sarah, we have a couple of questions in the chat, but I'm wondering if maybe we should hold off on those and see if the next part of what you present is going to cover some of those questions.
I will keep up with the query for a moment, and then I'll tell you how to look for an agent, maybe, if you're okay with that. But just two things about the query. Once again, with Brigitte, we work very differently. We're kind of alternative literary agent in the sense that we're not that stuck on the presentation. But from like what I discussed with other literary agents that has like big agencies, you need to work on your query as much as you work on your book. Really, you need to write and rewrite and make sure you put the right name of the agent on it, and maybe you do some adjustments depending on who you are sending it to. So it's really about reading, rereading, make sure there is no, it's the first thing they will be in contact with from your work. It's the query, it's this email. And also, if you're aiming at really big, well-established agency, often you don't send your text with the query. You send the query and you say, would you be interested in considering my work? And then either they won't get back to you, maybe they will say, sorry, that's not what we're looking for, or maybe they will say, yes, please send me the book, or send me, we always ask for the full book, but sometimes they will say, send me 3 chapters, 50 pages. And so, yes, work hard on your query. I feel that you also know you're ready to send your book when you're able to write this perfect, not perfect, but this really like on the point query that really catches the attention, and it means that you know where your book is in the industry, what kind of book, what kind of inspiration you do it for, what makes it different. So work hard on your query, and also, and if I go bit back in what I was saying, so I mentioned you have to write the best book that you can, and also you must be sure you're ready for this. You're ready for this ride. It means, are you ready to work with an agent that will give you feedback? Are you ready to take in those feedback? Maybe at some point you're not, maybe, and I think it's also part of being a writer, being able to hear the feedback, kind of sort out what an editor of an agent will be, but kind of sort out what, but are you ready to hear this? And also another important part is, are you ready kind of let it go? When we work as an agent, we try, of course, to be in touch with the writer as much as possible and let him know about every step of the process. But for instance, when we start submissions, we're not writing to you every day telling you, we send it to this publisher and this publisher, and now so it's not that we keep you in the dark purposely, but we'd rather come with good or bad news once it's done. And it's also something that you need to kind of to have in mind, that it's kind of, you need to let go a little bit of it once we start the submission, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can with like all the info that we got. So your book must be prepared, and you must also be prepared for that. Write your query as good as you can write in, that it be really the best reflection of your work, and also what makes it stand out, what makes it different. Of course, pay attention to your writing as much as you did with your collection of short stories, or your novel, or your nonfiction. I will move on to how to find a literary agent. I mean, where do you find the contact? But is there any question prior to that you would like me to
Yes, please. I have a question. Hi, my name is Amira Tufel. Thank you very
Hi.
much for giving us your time. This information is very helpful. For nonfiction manuscripts, where does the book proposal fit in? I understand there's the query, and then if they're interested, you would send them the manuscript. But what's the book proposal then? Where does that go?
Yes, it's a very good question. It's something I haven't mentioned. I would say there are different categories of nonfiction. One is what I call literary nonfiction, which can be like a memoir. And for me, this will pretty much fall in the same process as a novel. So you send the query, and if you have more of a nonfiction that maybe will interest university press or will be more in the field of social sciences, then you will write a proposal, which is, if you haven't written the book yet, which is, here's what the book will be about, here the chapter, the structure of it, and maybe you have a sample of the first 3 chapters. I'm not able to tell you way more about this because it's not something that I'm really that we do a lot, but in the podcasting that I sent to John and that I will share with you, I think you can find more specific aspect about how to write this proposal for a nonfiction that will fall more in the realm of university press or maybe social sciences and stuff like that.
Sorry, Anita, do you want to go ahead?
Well, I don't know, like, I could also wait for the question and answer period. But I'll tell you what the question is. Okay, the question is, are you only interested in unpublished writers, debut authors? Is there any advantage for someone who's already published to approach an agent? Maybe you can answer that later.
Yes, I will answer it now. I think it's interesting, and it will also, I will speak for my experience and what we're looking for. As long as we love a text, we'll go for it with Brigitte. That's what we do. There's always a form of excitement about the idea of a discovery of a new voice, but we also took in the past, and will still do it, writers that have published in the past. It might be a bit more challenging depending on the history of the sales, but it's not something we want to look at. Maybe the answer will differ, but I think if you have a very good book, like even if you published before, people will be interested in it. So we do it, I'm sure, and I'm sure other agents do it. Like we have, I'm thinking of a writer that wrote to us. He has a new book. He wants to change publisher, and we read the book. We loved it, and yeah, we're completely considering it, whatever are the sales of the book. So we're open to that, and I'm sure if it's a good book, we'll go for it. And agents are looking for good stories, for good books. So do not keep yourself from sending anything because you think it's not the first book. It's not. No, you have like so many different stories. But the thing that is important is that you work hard on your craft. But yes, second, third book, 10th book, we'll look at it.
I guess I was asking from the point of view of the author themselves, like, what's the advantage of approaching an agent? And would you be able to open doors to bigger publishers? Would that be the advantage?
Yes. There are, I think, several aspects to this. First, we know the industry, and we know the people who work in the industry, and we know what are the taste of publisher and what they're looking for. So we're able to submit and to have a kind of you won't be on the slush pile. When I send a text to a publisher, I know that they will read it quickly. And then I'm able, maybe in the best case scenario, maybe have several offers. So this is the first part. Being inside the industry, knowing the business, knowing the people, and make sure the manuscript ends in the right hands. This is the first side. The second aspect is that we take care of all the business stuff that a writer is not interested in. As we say, reading the contract, negotiating. You don't have to talk about money with your editor. We do that. So when you talk with your editor, you talk about your text and how will how to write the book and how to have it publicized. So I would say this, yes, the knowledge of the industry, the contacts that we have, and the fact that we take care of all the business aspect. And this leads me to a point that is important that I haven't mentioned, is what's the business model? So agents work on commission. So, and it's important when you choose an agent, an agent should never ask you for any money before a book deal is signed. Like if you have an agent and say, okay, they ask for our money to reread, this is something else. Like they can be a very high profile reader and you will pay them to have a look on your book. This is something. But what an agent do is that they have a percentage of commission on the deal that they sell. So we take, in our case, a 15% commission on the deals. But yes.
Could I pick up the point you made about republishing? So I've got a book published by it's a US publisher, and they haven't done any of the marketing that they said they would. They haven't got the resources to do it. I've had good reviews of the book in various publications. What I'd like to do is retrieve the rights of that book and offer it to another publisher. Now, would an agent like you be open to that sort of approach? And if so, what are the sort of the legal aspects of what I'd have to do? Because obviously I signed the contract right at the beginning, but since then it's been a completely unsatisfactory arrangement. So, they haven't approached any of the literary fairs or the reviewers or influencers or anything like that they said that they would at the beginning.
Okay.
So
I'll try to give a broad answer, so not to enter in the specific of your situation, but for anyone. Okay. As we said, we really represent writers and try to build a career. So it can be a premise to working with them that we try to retrieve the rights, to have them and to work on them. Because if we don't have the rights of the book, we're not able to sell it. So we look at the contract, we see the possibilities, we discuss it, and we've done it in the past. So it's something that an agent could do if he's interested in a book. Yes, we can retrieve the rights. Okay. And we can also, for the next contracts, make sure you don't sign, a deal that kind of leave you like stuck with this publisher.
Okay, thank you.
So once you write your book, you had it read with a lot of people, you're ready, you wrote a query, who are you going to send it to? There's a very high number of agents, and what's important is that you're able to aim your submission to the right one. So I've sent to John, and I think he'll share it with you. There is different resources. The first of all is the first of them is the Association of Canadian Literary Agents. I think there are around 30 of them, and it's something you can look at, because of course being in Canada, starting with a Canadian agent seemed like the most natural thing to do. Have a look at their website, have a look at the profile of their agent, have a look at the book they've represented in the past, have a look, sometimes they mention the genre they're looking for. Some are only looking for nonfiction, some other for upmarket, some other child's book. So you really need to make sure you send it to the right email inbox, I would say. So the Association of Canadian Literary Agents. Then there's a website called Manuscript Wishlist, extremely resourceful. You have a very, very rich registry of literary agents and what they're looking for. Some are open to queries, some are not. Some are looking for, as I mentioned before, horror story. Some are looking for like any other genre. So very resourceful, and you have like kind of a detail of what they're looking for. If you have a doubt about a literary agent, you can sometimes look it up on Twitter, now called X, but I still call it Twitter. Some of them are very present online, so it can give you also an idea. of what they're looking for and of their personality. That's also what I do with publisher, like before meeting them, when it's a first meeting, trying to get what's their personality. They're human beings, so they look for a good story, but some will be more drawn to, I don't know, some topics or some others. So it's always a very interesting work to do prior to sending. There is another website called Agent Query, the same kind of a registry. And then what you can do if you really, really want to know a good sense of what's the business and what's the industry like, there's a professional website called Publishers Marketplace that we use as professional to register all the deal that we make. So you have the book, you have the name of the editor who bought it, and you have the name of the agent who sold it to the editor. It's a paying subscription. You can use it maybe for a month. Sometimes they have an offer, and you can have a look. But it's really, really, if you want to have like a big knowledge of the industry, this is for me more of a bonus. But already with the resources I mentioned before, I think you will have a good sense, and you can try and select. And the last thing about this aspect is that send your queries to multiple agents. Send it to several of them. Maybe you start with 5, 10, because in the case you have someone interested, you can go back to another agent and telling them, look, I don't know if you had the chance to look at my book. I have someone interested. What do you think? So send it to many of them, to several agents, because the chances will be higher. But also, if you happen to have several interests, you can have the possibility to choose between several agents. Yes, I think there's a question.
Yes, I'm wondering if a Canadian writer is trying to access the United States market and their work isn't thematically linked to Canada. Would it make more sense to look for a literary agent in the United States, or would Canadian agents also have that sort of reach?
Yes, the industry between Canada and United States is very linked. So you have some important Canadian publisher who also distribute their book in the US. So having a deal in Canada would mean your book will be available in the US. I think you can try on both fronts. You can have Canada, maybe because you're based here, that makes kind of more sense, but this will not keep you from having a deal in the US. You will see in the registry of Canadian literary agents, some of them have book published in the America. We have just had 2 deals with American publishers, so yes, it's kind of you can start with Canada, but the most important, I would say, start with the country you're in, and then make sure it really fits what they're looking for. I'll really take the time to look at like their profile, their books, and make it as relevant as possible. Even maybe you can kind of adjust the query depending on who you're sending it to. This is a lot of work that it's not about writing your book, but that's very important. You really need to put it some time and effort to get there. Yeah. Yes, I think Jess, you're raising your hand.
Yes. Can you hear me? I'm just on the bus.
Yes, I can hear you.
I apologize. My question's on the same thread that was just asked. I was curious, how you break into the U.S. market if you have a book. Say, for example, Canada, literary fiction sells better, but if you're writing a fantasy book, it sells better in the U.S. market or potentially the European market. How do you break into those markets? Is there any tricks that you have or secrets? Well, not maybe secrets, but tricks of what you can do to break into those markets?
Get an agent that will help you. No, not to, I'm being, it's not, but to be honest, I think what we want is you to have a career and your book to sell as much as possible. So if we have a book that we know is very good and that we know is a good fit for another country that is not the country you're based in, we will try and do this work to reach out for the right publisher.
Okay.
Whether
Thank you so much.
Yes, Julie.
Hi. Also, thank you for doing this. This is great.
I'm glad.
I'm wondering how important it is for the author to have an existing following. You hear a lot about people saying, oh, you need X number of followers on Instagram, or you need to have a newsletter with this many subscribers or this many followers on Twitter. How, like, do you factor that in when considering whether or not you're going to take on a client?
I don't look at this at all. This is me and this is Brigitte. We look at the text. This is the only thing that matters to us. If it's a good book, it's a good book. Then it really depends. Some people, if you go to Penguin Random House, will say, we look at the following, but it really depends also on what you write. Like, for me, not having a following doesn't mean your book won't get published. Though, if you have followers, mention it in your query later, maybe. You know what I mean? But to me, of course, it will help because it's a base of potential readers that will buy a book. But I mean, we don't care about that. And it also depends on the book you're writing.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know, if you're a doctor and you want to write a book about how to fight disease with a very good diet, and you already have a very good following on Instagram, the chance that you get a book deal is much higher. But then if it's a novel, if it's a nonfiction, literary nonfiction, if it's a child's book, that's very different.
Okay. Thank you. That's reassuring. Thank you.
Yes, don't try and start like trying to get forward. Just I always say just focus on the writing.
Thanks.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. One is, when you look at agents, they have a list of the things that they want and they don't want. They also say, if they say send 50 pages or whatever, or a section of your book, they say do not send with an attachment. They will not open attachments. So if you're going to send a book, how would you actually send it?
You have a good point here that maybe I should stress, is that the requirement regarding the queries really vary from one publisher to another, and this is something you should really pay attention to. As mentioned by Marie, some will ask a sample, some will ask the full text. If they don't want an attachment, I think you should try and send them a link to your book that you can maybe like use on WeTransfer or something like that. Maybe they're afraid your file is too heavy. But specifically, I think, yes, you should try to generate a link that will lead to your book. But this is something I've never heard of, so I won't be able to go into.
I always think that they're afraid of spam or some kind of virus that people would send an attachment.
Then you send it on a link. Can you WeTransfer, maybe is an option, WeTransfer, and then you upload your it's used for very heavy files, but you can do it with any files. You go online, you upload your file, and then you ask them to generate a link, and then this link you copy in your email, and they will click on it and download your text.
And then I have another sort of an odd question. So there are many kinds of fiction. And let's say you had a literary fiction that was not exactly the kind of thing you normally deal with, but you think this is incredible, someone should publish it. Do agents ever share with other agents?
Yes, they do, especially among bigger agencies that have maybe 5-10 agents. They might say, this is great potential. This is not for me, but I'll pass it on to someone else. So yeah, there's communication. And as I mentioned before, every agent has their specialty, have their personality, their personal taste. But they know each other. It's like editors. Sometimes they say, it's not for me, but why don't you try this or this? So yes, there can be a circulation of the text.
Thank you.
Sarah, we have a few questions in the chat. Would you like me to read those now?
Yes, for sure.
Great. I'll start from the top. Would you be willing to represent the author of a graphic novel?
Yes, we do have actually one of the author we represent. We really work on enthusiasm with Brigitte, and time we're really ready to take on any project that we feel is so great, even if it might be more difficult to get it done, but we kind of always manage to do this. So I'm always curious. I never say don't send anything. I want to have a look at it. So I have now like a very good base of contact also in this in graphic novels. So yeah, I'd be interested to.
Great.
And
this one's
and of course, if in like for submitting, I'm sure like in the registries of agent, there are also some specialized in this aspect. So
great. This one's more about similar sort of question, but more about subject matter rather than form. Do you represent writers who wrote a memoir about child sexual abuse?
Yes. We have one French writer who wrote about a personal experience. Yes. So we did in the very specific, and we did. One thing about the memoir that I think is important when you write it. It's a memoir. It's highly personal, but when you write it, what makes it universal? What makes it something out that your own experience? How valuable and important it is. I think that will make the difference between, well, we'll say maybe a diary and something. So just a quick word about this.
Great. And another genre question. What is your position on whether genre fiction can be literary? Do you take on speculative fiction, for example?
I really think that genre can be literary. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a very good culture or knowledge of sci-fi, for instance. I do read dystopia, and I always say a good book is a good book. So yes, of course, dystopia can be literary and speculative can be literary. Yeah, absolutely. It's not contradictory.
Great. And next, we're just firing through these. What about age? Given that an agent wants to develop a long-term relationship with a writer, does a younger writer have more of a chance of landing an agent versus an older writer and publisher for that matter?
I think it's a very natural tendency of any business, cultural business, that we're drawn to what's fresh and new because it's full of promises. And when you don't have a back record of other things that you did, it's like everything is possible. And you take in a debut writer and you say it might be the greatest success of the next 10 years. So I have to say that there is always something very exciting about someone, but it's not about age. It's more about maybe being the first time writer. That being said, I think that that will be my answer for everything, but I'm very sincere. Like, if your book is good, we don't look at the age. Like, I'll give you an example. We took in a writer called Pierre Yergeau. He's from Quebec. He has a long history of writing novels here in Quebec. He's, I think, now over 65. We really liked his work, the work he did in the past. So we said, can we represent you? He said, okay. And now he wrote a new book that we found a publisher in France. And like we will start not from scratch, but we will start another chapter of his career with something different. So, but yes, there is something about what's fresh and new that gives you so much hope, and that you will, yes, this is, I think, something in the business that I cannot deny, and maybe in human nature that I cannot deny.
Great. There's one other question I missed further above, so I'm just going to read that out and then maybe you can turn it over to Isabelle. I'm currently self-publishing a book, working with a small publisher in Ottawa. My book will be on his website. Is it a good idea for me to approach an agent with the book after it exists in print on demand?
That's not an easy question. Most of the agent will look for unpublished material. So if it's self-published, it's maybe something they will less look at. However, if your book is downloaded and paid for like many times, it might be the start of something else. It might be an argument then to go to a publisher and say, okay, I have this self-published book that was read by 100,000 people. Will you be interested in presenting me now? But now that your book is about to be online, I don't think it's the best timing to do it now. Maybe wait for how the book will go. There can be some kind of reluctance for a self-published book in the beginning, but it's not definitive.
Great. There are a few other questions in the chat, but maybe we can break it up and move to Isabel.
Yes. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
So I have a novel. I have a romantic comedy that I've been querying for almost a year now. I have about 30 queries that have gone out. And what I find very challenging about the process is when you actually hear back from an agent, because some just don't reply and you consider that a rejection, right? When you get the standard form replies with absolutely no feedback. So you don't really know what's, is it your manuscript? Is it your query letter? Is it just not fitting their list at the moment when it seems like it fits their manuscript wish list perfectly, right? So what advice would you have for someone in my situation like that? Like the query letter's been professionally reviewed, the book's gone through beta readers, like it's ready to go,
Yes. I know that it's very hard and it can be kind of daunting to be sending to so many people and not having any personal feedback that will help you move on. I know. So it takes a lot of persistency. It takes a lot of patience. Maybe of course, I don't know anything about your book, but I think the question all of you should ask yourself what makes it different? And maybe the reason why it didn't yet catch the attention, it sounds too much like things that have been done before. That might be a reason. But there are so many agents. There are thousands of them. So even if you already have 30 queries, it's not the end of anything. Like you need maybe some time to let it rest and then go back at it when you feel like you have the energy for that, and then go back to look at the registry. I feel the more you look at the registry, the more you see possible options. So that can also give you energy. There are really a lot of them. And then, what makes it different? I think it's important. That's what people will look for.
Thank you.
Could I pick up Isabel's point there? Because with my first novel, I sent it to a number of agents, and like Isabel, I often got no response at all. But I did get one interesting response from one agent, and he said he liked the book. He said, but at the moment, he said, I can't sell anything that doesn't have a protagonist that's a strong female. And he said that's what people are buying at the moment. So it's sounds to me like there seem to be sort of trends going on. So if I look at a lot of books that are now being sold, it's sort of like transgender themes, or being part of a minority group in a village, or coming of age or something. I'm just wondering, can you give us an idea of what's hot at the moment? What are the themes and trends that are catching on at the moment? Apart from protagonists that are strong females.
I can tell you what's hot at the moment, but it won't be hot when your book about it will be written. So I think it's not something you should pursue. You should really think about what is the topic, what is the situation I have a urge to write about, and that makes it that I cannot, I need to do this. Because trend, it's always the same. There's one book in that trend that works, and then you have thousands of other books on that topic that doesn't work until the next trend. So it's true that some publishers are very risk averse. Can you say that in English? But following the trend, I don't think it will lead you anywhere. And of course, I understand the point of having more female character, but you don't always have a counterexample about something that, you know, like I know a lot of, I would say, literary fiction, we have a trend about horror and feminism, and especially coming from Latin America. But it really came from the urgency for women in Latin America to have a genre that can explain how terrible and violent is it to be a woman in that context. And it really came from what they saw and what they experienced. So I could say, yeah, the next trend is dystopia or what, but I don't think it's the right path to follow, at least for me, because once you might have this idea, but many of the people will have this idea about this hot topic of the moment. And if you don't have anything special to say about it, it will get lost and it will not stick out in the thousands of queries they receive. So I will refrain from following the trends and try to set the trend.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yes, Tina, I see that you raise your hand.
Hi, I have a quick question about if parts of your novel have been published in another space, in an anthology or you know, some Canadian literary space. Does that make the process more complicated for a novel? Is that something that you put to the side, or something that intrigues you, sparks your interest, or like how does that kind of fit into the agent's experience?
The fact that you had work published before, is that
specific work from the novel, so like a chapter from the novel or a short story or something like that?
No, it can actually be a good sign for the work of Caroline Dawson as the Enders Disappear. She won a contest for a short novel that then was part of the book. So to me, it's not it's not a non-starter, not at all. It's good also to know that it has been published already. So I won't consider it like published work per se, because it's only a small part of a bigger piece of work. So no problem with that.
Thanks.
We have two questions related to short story collections. First, do you have tips for pitching a short story collection to agents? All the tips I've read for writing query letters don't seem to apply to a short story collection, i.e. highlighting the main tension, mystery, etc.
Yes. I think the reason why you didn't find many information about the Crank for Short collection, it's because it's not something literary agent will necessarily be looking for in priority. I believe sometimes I feel short story collection might be the second or the third work of an author that is already kind of identified. So I think it can be challenging to find I mean, the Anglo world may be a bit less, and I think in Canada, in Quebec, you can find, but I think it can be challenging to start with collection of short stories. Even if I think it's an excellent exercise and you can really see the talent of a writer in a collection of short stories. But maybe I think there might be some reluctance to start with that, to take in an author with the collection of short stories. Still, maybe it's something that can be, that you can look at in the manuscript wish list, that website where I just mentioned what they look for. But I think my feeling is that, like in France, for instance, it's something that would be super hard, almost impossible. Here, I know there's a bigger tradition of short stories, but in other countries, in Europe, I would say it's much more difficult. And short story collection that I've had success, I believe, maybe are written by writers that were more established, and so people were willing to read more of their prose, whatever the form was. So they went to, yes. So not impossible, nothing is impossible, but yes, more challenging.
And more directly, how likely is your agency to pick up a short story collection, given that the novel form sells better? Have you taken any short story collections so far?
No, we haven't. I think, to be honest, if I really, really love it, I feel it's very good writing and stuff, I will say I'm very interested, but I think it will be hard for me to start with collection of short stories, but I want to keep knowing about your work and everything. We always need to be looking at the text, but I think it will it might be a bit challenging. Yes.
Great. So there are two more questions in the chat. I'll read those out now. Just let me find them. Are you currently accepting submissions?
We are. Yes.
Great. Short and sweet. And then last question. I believe you said writers have to submit marketing plans. How sophisticated is this expected to be, given that writers get publishers to take care of that kind of thing, and most writers aren't marketing execs?
Oh, sorry, I think it was a misunderstanding. We as agent ask the publisher to submit a marketing plan that we look at, and that can be part of the contract to make sure they apply it. Of course, it's not the role of the writer. I'm sorry if I gave the sense that it was the case. No, you don't have to do any marketing plan. Please don't. No.
Some small Canadian publishers do require the author to propose a marketing plan, just saying.
Really?
Yep.
Never heard that before.
I know, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Wow. You mean agent or publisher?
Nope, when you're shopping around for a publisher.
Well, this is the first time I hear that, and I've never had to, never been.
There's an example on the screen, House of Anansi.
Okay, let me see.
Which is a mid-sized publisher.
Yes, they're good publisher actually. Do you have
I think they just want to know if the author understands and is willing to buy into making appearances, sitting at bookstores for hours and hours, meeting the public, doing stuff like that, or doing book clubs if it comes up. Perhaps that's all they're fishing to see if you're willing to do that kind of work.
Yes, of course. It is something that the editor usually discuss before the contract or after, but it's not something that I will ask a writer prior to any contract. You know what I mean, or any offer. But then, of course, the author must let us know if he's willing to go on tour and how many signings is ready to go, because there's your book, and there's you become almost a salesperson when your book is published. Like if it has a lot of success, you can spend 1 or 2 years talking about your book. Like in the case of this writer that represents Fatima Das, she almost spent 2 years touring around the world to talk about the book. And this is part of being prepared in the best case scenario. And I wish it to all of you that you have a great success. It's being able to talk about the book in front of so many different audience and talk about it a lot until you're sick of it. Yes.
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple of authors. One of them was with Penguin, another one was with Hachette, and he said that both of them said that they had to put in quite a bit of effort in addition to what what Penguin or Hachette was doing. And so one in particular, she said that she didn't think that they organized enough tours or appearances or participation literary festivals. And she said she spent a lot of time doing that, even though she was with a large mainstream publisher. And from what I'm reading, is it seems to have changed a bit over recent years, that now there is a lot more onus on the author themselves to get involved in marketing. And from what the two writers I spoke to said, that they said you can't just depend on the publisher anymore.
Yes, I have an anecdote from a friend who's a scriptwriter and movemaker that went to Festival de Cannes, and he met with an agent, and he asked her, hey, how do you get an agent? And once you have an agent, what do you do? And she answered, you have to behave exactly as you did not have an agent. So you have to keep on making your own connection and everything. I thought it's a bit excessive, but I think there's an interesting point in this, that you still need to be one of the promoter of your book and keep on talking about it and making connection and things happen. Of course, you need your publisher to be fully committed to your book and make it happen, but you're still always one of his ambassadors. So
Sarah, are we ready to take any final questions? Yeah, Sarah, or did you have anything else? Okay, great.
No. I'm ready. If you still have question, I'll be happy to answer. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. So feel free to either open up your mic to say your question out loud, write it in the chat, throw up your hand using the reaction on Zoom, and we'll get to your questions.
I'm just going to blurt it out. Does the agent's 15% come out of the author's 10%?
So the way the deal is built, it's two aspects. So first, they pay an advance for buying your book. Let's say $200 advance, and from this advance, we take 15%, and then you have royalties, which is a percentage of the price of the book that you get. So we take 15% on every income that the author gets. So it's on the advance, but also on the royalties. And
Thank
also, yeah.
Thank you. That's clear.
Yeah, I see there's a question from Joy. Will an agent consider taking on a writer whose manuscript has already made the rounds and been rejected by local publishers? That's a very good question. This is something I haven't talked about. And also it comes back to the question of the timing. It will be hard for a publisher to take on a book that's been already submitted a lot to. It will be hard for an agent, sorry, to take a book that will already have been submitted to a lot of publisher, because the room we have for action is much narrow. So as I always say, we need to look at the books and look at the text, and maybe we can see opportunities, but we will ask the writer. We always ask, have you already sent the book to publisher, and send us the list of the publisher you send it to and who said no. Because it helps us see if there's any strategy we can implement to get a book deal, and say, okay, maybe you've been there. I understand what they say no, because it's not the right fit for them, but we have other options. So the premise is that we're very enthusiastic about the book, and then if there is this challenge, we need to be very transparent, and the writer should be super transparent about it, and then we'll see what we can do. But it's going to be complicated. I'll read the question by Jenna. If you have a book ready to submit, is it worth finding the right time in the trends of literature to submit it to agencies? As I said, I'm very, I don't entirely believe in trends, because they come and go. So, and I feel like if it's the trend of a book, there will be many people like you that will follow that trend. And so the agents will receive in the next 6 months, 6 months is 100 of proposals that sound like what was a success. So I think you need to send it when you think it's perfectly done, and that you did the best that you could with writing the book, and not paying attention to the trend. It's too volatile also. I see the next question by Don. What is your attitude toward a writer who has self-published? Will the fact that they've been self-published impact your attitude toward that writer's second book? No. What will impact my attitude is the writing. So no, to me, it's not something that I will necessarily mention in the query, unless it was a huge success, but I can look at the book anyways. Suzanne asked, is there any room for the author as a recluse? A recluse being someone that doesn't want to do public appearances, right? I'll tell you a story. We received, when we started the agency, we received a manuscript from an anonymous French writer that we fell in love with Brigitte, so much that we became obsessed, really obsessed. And it turned out that it wasn't one book, it was a body of work. It was 7 books, and we felt like we had gold in our hands. It was so exciting, and we got in contact with him. It took a lot of time to build a relationship of trust with him until he told us who he was, but he was always very adamant that he didn't want to appear to answer any interview, and he wanted to be published anonymously, so with a pen name, and not appear anywhere, maybe answer interview by email. But we've been submitting this book for over 3 years now. It's really one of the best things we've read since we started the agency, and the fact that he doesn't want to appear publicly has made it almost impossible to find someone. There are still options, but it's really, really, really complicated, because now being a writer is writing a book and then being able to talk about it, being the ambassador of the book and going on tours and do signing and discuss with the press. And that will also what makes the difference maybe in the success of a book. How can you talk about it, and are you willing to appear? So I never say anything is impossible. It's not, I think, but from my experience, it is not like from what I've experienced from something that we thought really was gold. It's very challenging.
But how about if, you know, you've got significant limits on what you can do that way? I mean, how important would that be? Do you understand?
Excuse me, can you repeat the question? I'm not sure I got it. Yeah.
What if for whatever reason, you know, you are still, the writer is significantly limited in what they can do in terms of public and touring, and, you know?
What do you mean by limited?
Well, you know, not a lot of traveling, for instance, or, you know.
Not able to do that, not
Yeah.
able. You always find option. You can have interviews on Zoom, but I really, like, this is something I see from being in the business. It's hard. It's now part of the job to be kind of the salesperson of the book. Not impossible, of course. It can, the publisher can adjust to the writer, but they really want you to be there. It makes a huge difference. So
Okay, thank you.
Is it true that sending queries and manuscript to either literary agent or publisher in the summer is not as effective because it's vacation time? Is there a best time of year to submit? I've heard a literary agent said that she received so many queries on Thanksgiving, and she explained that because people have this family dinner and everybody's like, so what about that book that we've been talking about for 10 years? Did you send it to anyone? So she said never send it over Thanksgiving. We also receive a lot of book at the beginning of the year because I think it's part of New Year resolutions. So maybe before summer vacation may be a good option, maybe September, October, maybe better, maybe not like the second day of January. But if a literary agency does its work properly, they will go through all the queries. But it's true that there are some time of the year that we're kind of more overwhelmed. I would say beginning of the year, Thanksgiving, this is not our case, but I think for more like Anglo-American, American and Canadian, and maybe summer vacation, people are away, so you're just gonna wait even more. So yeah. Should we mention our willingness to promote in the query letter? No, the query letter should be short and really should be about the book. You have very few space, so make it useful to talk about what your book is about, what the book is about. It's like kind of a CV, you know, like you have a limited amount of space and you really need to put everything that gives the publisher a good sense of who, in this case, of what you wrote. That's really important. So the discussion about the promotion will come much later. At that point, what they want to know what the book is about, how does it stand out from the rest, how does this writer has a knowledge of the industry nowadays, mentioning some of the recent titles. Yes. Should you put a link to your website? I would say not necessarily. I think in your bio, if you already mentioned some of the things that you did, if you're a translator, if you wrote in the past, I don't think at that point it would be necessary.
I think we have time for one last question. If there's anybody with one final question. Oh.
Does your agency try to sell manuscript to smaller publisher like Study for ESA, or do you focus on the big five? Also, if you had your manuscript read by an authenticity reader, sensitivity, should we mention this? Okay, I'm sorry, I'll read it again because I read it for myself, but maybe I'll read it for everyone. To build on Joey's question, does your agency try to sell manuscripts to smaller publishers like Stelliform or ECW, or do you focus on the big five? Also, if you had your manuscript read by an authenticity reader, sensitivity reader, should we mention this? So the first question, we really try to focus on finding the right publisher for the book. Getting into the big five is a lot of hard work. And based on what the book and the writers we represent, we have been more working with a smaller publishers such as New York Review Books, such as Coffee House Press. I mean, in the US. In France, we kind of also got deals with bigger publisher. However, we're in contact with Penguin Random House, with Forest Strauss and Giroux. So we are in contact with all of them, but getting into the big five, it's very complicated. But we try to find the right fit for the right book. So it's not something that we discard. And then I wouldn't mention the authenticity or sensitivity reader. I think what you should mention in your query is not the process of the book. It's not, I started writing this book because it's not, it was read by a beta reader and by a sensitivity reader. What you really should focus on is the reading experience. What's you really like I said, like the back cover of a book. Like this is the kind of info you won't mention. It was reread by a sensitivity reader. So not about the process, about the book itself.
Okay, great. So that's time. Thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you especially, Sarah, for doing this for us. We all really appreciate it.
I hope it was helpful and it gave you energy and like will to keep on applying and write here. That's the most important.
Absolutely. Like I said, so we'll be posting this on YouTube, so you can always refer back to it. I'll also send an email to everyone with those links that I sent. If you're interested in Sarah's literary agency, it's the monte-charge culturel.
Yes.
I'll put the link back in the chat again, but I'll also include it in my follow-up email. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And I think, John, you can also give my contact. It's on the website, but we're open to queries. So if anything, and I'll be happy to look at it.
Even better. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.